Thank you, Patrick. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our first meeting of the MCI Cedar Junction Advisory Committee. It is now 6 o'clock, and our meeting is posted for that time, so I call the meeting to order. Let's all stand and recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, so first of all, I want to thank everybody for being here tonight. This is the first in what will no doubt be many, many, many meetings where we're going to talk about how we can affect the direction of what lands in the now Cedar Junction site, the former prison site. As you all know, that site is owned by the state of Massachusetts, and we're going to get into some discussions we've had with the state in a minute. But the thing that's important to us as a group tonight, as we kick this whole process off, is that we be thinking proactively about how we can influence what that site gets used for in a way that works best for the people of Walpole. And so that's really going to be our charge here, and I'll be starting there in a minute. But before I do, let's just go through the group here. So we've got myself, Jim O'Neill, and Glenn Maffey from the Select Board, Planning Board Chair Jack Conroy, Pat DeShane, our Economic Development Officer. We've got Brianna Pinheiro from the Economic Development Committee, Jim Crowley, the Building Commissioner, Rick Mattson, head of the DPW, and Scott Gustafson, who runs the water group for us, and then our Town Administrator, Jim Johnson, over there. So I just want to thank everybody for being willing to do this. This is going to take a fair amount of effort as we go through this for the next many months. So what we want to go through tonight is we have an agenda. And we want to start by going through the charge that the Select Board has put together for this group. And the reason we want to do that is we want to make sure that we're all level set on what our roles and accountabilities are, and what is it that this group is supposed to do outcome-wise. We also want to have a discussion and a recap of some of the discussions and meetings that have already taken place, specifically with our state reps and senator and Department of Corrections and some representatives from the governor's office, because we've had some conversations with them. We will talk about a couple of items around what we know about the site. So we've got some of the department heads here to do that. Then we want to talk a little bit about the future direction and where we go. So things that we have in mind is we want to get legislative updates. So pulling our reps and senators into these discussions and having meetings with them to get updates on where the process stands and where the state is, but then also having conversations, again, when appropriate, with the governor's office, Department of Economic Development and Affairs, to make sure that we're engaging properly with the state. So a lot of things that we're going to do going forward, and we'll get into some of those things tonight. Let's start with the charge, though, just to make sure we're all level set on that. You're going to hear me use that phrase, level set, a lot tonight, because that's really the point of this meeting, is to make sure that this group is all on the same page and, understanding what has gone on and what we're here to do. So we've already talked about the membership. It's this group, so I won't go through that. Initial term that the Select Board came up with was a year, so through December 2025. My expectation is it'll go on well beyond that, especially given the speed with which the state moves. Our purpose, the purpose of the MCI Walpole Advisory Board, is to educate and advise the Select Board on the most effective strategy to achieve a disposition of the MCI Walpole property most favorable to the interest of the town. The board will rely on community input and the expertise of its members. So we are looking to this group to bring their expertise into the conversation, and we will be looking for considerable input from the community. So we're going to have public hearings and things like that to collect information from the public and to disseminate information to the public on where the process stands. The work of the board could expand if the Select Board determines the board's charge needs to be added to. So if we need to add more members, we will, and we'll deal with that as time goes by. So we're not wedded to just this group. We'll bring in whoever the right people are. So the specific charge, the initial charge of the advisory board, is to work to develop a vision, set goals and objectives, create a preliminary list of potential uses, and outline the process the select board may follow regarding the MCI Cedar Junction site. Concepts and potential uses to consider may include life sciences, state and federal contractors, warehouses, mixed-use commercial and residential developments, among others. All with the overarching goal, and this is really important, at least to me, all with the overarching goal of promoting economic growth in the area while minimizing the strain on local resources, specifically the public school system and public safety. So we're calling that out very specifically in the charge because we don't want to overburden town resources as we go forward with this. And our goal should be to put something in that site that is that's productive, that generates good solid tax revenue for the town, but does not then create additional burden on the town. The advisory board will reach out to the Department of Correction and the Commonwealth's Commission of Capital and Asset Management and Maintenance and other state agencies as the board deems appropriate through Walpole State Delegation in order to attempt to understand what plans the state has for the future use of the site and further serve as a community voice to the state's efforts regarding the site. The reason we're going to go through the state delegation, and when we say the state delegation, we're talking about we have 4 representatives, that's Rogers, McMurtry, Marcus Vaughn, and Ted Phillips, and our state senator, Mike Rush. We're going to use Mike Rush's office as the principal point of contact into the state so that we are well coordinated and don't end up with, you know, a fracturing of the process, and Mike has agreed to do that. Determine the criteria and priorities of Walpole to evaluate potential scenarios should the site advance to the planning phase. Keep abreast of legislation and legislative hearings to propose and/or respond to potential changes, and establish regular cadence of meetings with necessary parties to ensure follow-through and on action items. That last one is important. I don't want this to be just talk. What we need to do coming out of each one of these meetings is have a list of things that we're going to follow through on and drive those things to closure, you know, with specific dates and accountabilities. So this is an action-oriented group. So that's the charge. Let me just pause there and see what questions or comments people have.
I'll just jump in and say real quick that I don't want to repeat a lot of things you said, but at this point in the process, it's very early, very much in the beginning, and there are more questions than answers, and that's okay. We knew that coming in, and we're going to just take our time to sort of gather information, and we're going to use that information to the best of our ability. I think it's not a coincidence that we have a planning board representative and an economic development representative here, because what we do know is that we want that site to be put to the best use possible. We also know that we don't have direct control over that site. So we want to start, that's why we want to have these conversations with the right people. We might not even know who the right people are yet, but again, that's part of this process, is who do we identify through our state delegation at the state level, what committees, what departments are relevant, you know, do we want lots of housing there? Do we want lots of economic, do we want more economic development? I think we're leaning toward, on the right side, economic development. And so this is a long process, and we just want to make sure we engage with the right people so that they know what we want. And I think part of the process is to find out what the state wants. Either the state wants economic development. If we can match up what we want with what the state wants, then that makes the conversation go a lot easier. So again, very early, but I'll just emphasize that point.
Yeah, and those are all very good points. Brianna?
I think the only question I have is, from what I understand, Walpole has the first right of refusal if DCAM decides to actually sell the property. Is that
I
true?
don't know that to be true.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's one question I have. And then
No one has ever said that
Okay.
in a meeting that I've been in.
Okay.
Okay?
And then the second question is there a world in which DCAM does not dispose of this property? Or have they indicated that they plan to, and that's kind of where the advisory board was?
There is a world that they may not dispose of the property, for sure. That's absolutely a possible outcome. It doesn't seem like a very smart thing to do, but it is an outcome that could happen. And what they've told us, and when we go through some of the discussions that we've already had, what you'll hear us say over and over again is, we've pressed them and pressed them and pressed them and pressed them for, you know, what's the plan for the plan, and there is none. So DCAMS doesn't even technically own the site yet. It's still under the control of the Department of Correction.
Okay.
And until DLC turns it over to DCAMS, they can't even really begin their process. It's our expectation that that process is going to take quite a long time. and they have been very, very slow to respond.
I will touch a little bit on the right of first refusal question, which is that if we do have it, it almost doesn't matter, because if somebody wants to come in and build 1,200 houses, and they say, okay, well, you have the opportunity to buy this land for $20 million, and we say, well, we don't have $20 million. Okay, well, then you don't get to exercise your right of first refusal. So I think the right of first refusal is fine if we have unlimited resources, but typically I think we'll be pitted against development. And if it's a favorable development, then great, we want them to come in. But if it's something that we don't want, or it's not sort of as part of our charge, then I'm not sure that right of first refusal gets us very much.
What you want, right,
Yeah.
right.
So just a
Must, yeah,
I think that's right, but I do, one second, Jack, but I do want to be clear, and Jim, I don't know if you've heard anything to the contrary, but I've never heard the words, right of first refusal.
I actually have talked to one of our reps, and
Okay.
and they mentioned that there was a bill that was filed, and I don't have the details of what bill and whether it passed, in which they inserted that language giving us the right of first refusal. And I wasn't sure that it was a big benefit, and I made that comment to the rep. I said, I'm not sure what that gets us, but.
So why don't we, as our first action item, let's figure that out.
Okay.
So, Jim, who's taking the minutes of this meeting?
Stephanie is.
Stephanie is?
She's watching it, so.
Okay, all right, so
I can give you the rep's name, it's not a.
let's, take the to-do to go figure out whether we actually have a right of first refusal on the site or not, okay? Jack?
Unless it's changed, it's always been state, opposite to the county. County refuses, comes to the town. Nobody can jump in. That's the way it's always been. You
Okay.
can't- So, but they have to offer to the county, and unless they've changed the laws, that's the way it's always been.
Okay.
And the county says yes or no, and then we get the next shot at it. Then if we say no, goes to wide open.
Okay, so let's, again, take the to-do to confirm that. That's helpful. Brianna, thank you for asking the question. Any other questions or comments? Jim?
Just because we a counterpart in Norfolk dealing with this, considering 50% is us and probably 50% is in their town. Like when this does, if it does go to bid or we get options, they'll have probably, obviously have some input from their side. Do we have a counterpart? Have they even started, do you know?
So we have intentionally not reached out to them yet because we don't want to confuse things. Our thought was to have a few of these meetings first, get our ducks in a row, get some of our thinking down on paper in terms of what potential uses might be acceptable to the town of Walpole, and when the time is right to do the reach out to Norfolk. There's a lot of complexity that goes with this. There's the prison, to your point, the prison is partly in Norfolk, so we're gonna have to deal with that. There are also broader things going on in Norfolk that could somehow factor in here. Norfolk's dealing with a lot of stuff, in terms of the old Pondville facility and all that. So my own preference, unless the committee wants to suggest otherwise, and I'm open to that, my own preference would be that we focus on what's right for Walpole first. Let's really get that down, and then as we go through the process with the legislative delegation, we'll then make the proper reach-outs to the other towns. Okay? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Jack?
Question, boiler plant, is that part of the deal too?
I'm sorry, say again?
Boiler plant, is that part of this deal?
I'm not sure I know what you're referring to.
Across the street, the big
The whole property, yeah, the whole property, yeah. There's a lot of utility stuff that we don't frankly even understand on the site, water, sewage treatment. We don't know how it interacts with the other prison facilities in the area. These are all things that we need to start to understand, and that facility across the street is part of that, Jack, so thank you.
So to that
Rick?
point,
Yeah,
Jim, we're meeting with Weston and Sampson tomorrow morning on another matter. They do have some information relative to the site, the sewer and water utilities, and they've offered to bring that to us. So we'll probably have that available for the next meeting.
good,
But based on what I see, both of the correction facilities share a water supply.
Okay.
It's a registered public water supply, and I believe they have 4 wells,
okay.
so.
And one water tower.
Right.
So one of the questions that John Hassenjager put to me today was, we're looking for an alternative source of water in the town. Does the water situation up in the prison site have any effect on any of that thinking? And of course, the answer is we don't know. But it's certainly something that we need to go and figure out. So Jack, your question's spot on, and we do need to understand the broad utility situation there, and we don't right now. Rick, as he pointed out, may have some of that information for us in Weston and Sampson tomorrow. They did all the work up there, so they have some view into it, and that should be helpful to us. So let's add that as takeaway number 2, which is update from Rick next meeting on what we learned from Weston and Sampson. Other questions or comments?
I might have a question for our Economic Development Director, Patrick, if I can. And I've asked you this in an email, so hopefully it doesn't take you totally by surprise. But in the agenda here, we mentioned that the Mass Office of Economic Development has an advisory committee, and then we'd like to, at some point, when we're ready, engage with them in a discussion on what might be an appropriate economic use of this site. Are there the state government is, to me, a little overwhelming. It's very vast, and you might have an understanding. You don't have to answer this today, but at some point, I'd like to have a better understanding if there are other committees, organizations, groups, whether it's through the governor's office or the executive branch, that might be where we want to target some questions and discussion.
Yeah, I mean, there definitely is when it's already town-owned property. I mean, I'm not sure how it works, but it would currently be under state control. So like Mass Office of Business Development is one.
Okay.
Mass Development's another agency that's kind of like a quasi-public agency you can go through for grant programs.
Okay.
But yeah, the tie-in with the state property, I'm not sure if that kind of complicates.
Sure. And we could talk to our legislative folks and ask them, I would ask them the same question I just asked you, but certainly I figured I would mention it to you as well.
Absolutely.
So, cool, thanks.
Other questions or comments related to the charge? Jack?
Since there's been a plethora of state schools closed, Medfield, Foxborough, wherever, it's a similar situation. It might be worthwhile for someone to check on how that was done. I assume it would be done the same process, whether it's a state school or prison, it's a big buildings and stuff, to find out how that went and so on.
I was gonna mention there's a MCI in Concord that just closed, and that one was fast-tracked this year. It was in the last bill, and it's going to be going through the DCAM process this year. So like, once we are kind of a little settled, I think it would they also have an advisory committee for the town of Concord that's looking at different economic uses. So it'd be a really good case study to like follow along, or maybe have a point of contact over there. Just to connect with, and like you said, see how that process went, especially with the Department of Corrections having to hand it back to the state and how that all went.
Well, in Foxborough's case, it went to, finally, Foxborough didn't want it, it went to a private. Just that whole process, how they do it. I assume the state's gonna do it the same way.
So let's add that to our list of action items to figure out what the process that has been followed in the past, whether it's state schools or Concord. If we could understand what that process looks like, that would be really helpful for this group to understand.
I do think Concord's like in the very early stages from what I could tell, so they're like probably just gonna be, months ahead of us, kind of.
They also have a ton of information out on our website, so if you're interested, go out and check that out. They've done a lot of work on this already.
Yeah.
This is one of the reasons why we felt it was so important for us to get ahead of this, is that we don't want to get outrun by the state on this. So, and that can happen. All right, anything else on the charge? All right, then let's move to our next area of discussion, which is just a quick update on sort of the overall timeline. So how did we get where we are? And remind everybody what that timeline actually looks like and what has transpired. And the reason for this is, again, so we all have the same information, so we're all level set. Oh, and one thing that I meant to say in the very beginning was, in an effort to have great transparency and share information and get information out as evenly and consistently as we possibly can and thoroughly, we're gonna televise every one of these. So you can see Walpole Media is here tonight. Are we actually live, Patrick, or we are? Okay, perfect. So we're actually live, which is great. It'll be also streamed on YouTube and all that. So everybody will have a chance to be able to see and hear this discussion, which we think is so important. One of the things that's in my mind is I want to make sure that we have put together, a chain of communications that has taken place and that will take place with the state, such that when the time comes for the state to make whatever decision they're gonna make under whatever process they're gonna follow, that it cannot be said that the town of Walpole did not actually proactively reach out to the state and proactively provide input to the state on what would be best for the town. So to that end, if we just rewind the tape, so this whole thing really starts back in 2022, in April, when we got notified by DOC, Department of Corrections, that the prison was going to be mothballed sometime in the next couple of years. Their rationale at the time had to do with needed upgrades on the site, which fall into the tens of millions of dollars. I think the electrical upgrades alone were $20 million or something like that. The population had decreased a lot. This prison was built in 1954, and as a result, it's kind of outserved its usefulness. And so the state decided that they would shut it down rather than spend all the money to do all these needed upgrades. So that's what they decided back in April of 2022, and that's when we got notified. We immediately thought best to reach out to our reps and senator and say, okay, let's get some discussion going early, because we want to understand what's actually happening here, what's the timeline for actually closing the prison, and then subsequently what's going to happen after the closure so that we can, work with the state to affect the outcome. We also said repeatedly, and I'll sound like a broken record as I go through this, and I'll try not to be redundant, but you'll get the point, that every time we have met with the reps, the senator, DOC, the governor's office on this, we have reiterated the point that we want our voice to be heard. It's our expectation that our voice will be heard, and we want a seat at the table as we go through this. So we've been adamant about that all the way along, and we have been assured that we will get that as we go through the process. Now, I will say, we haven't seen a lot of that, and part of that is because the state process has been slow to get going. Again, the reason that we want to do what we're doing is try and stay ahead, or at least even with the state process. So it all started back in April of 2022. We had a meeting in May, so very quickly after we were notified, with members from the representatives and our state and DOC to talk about what was really happening. And that's when we heard the news about the why they're closing it down and what they thought the process was going to look like. At that time, they said it's probably going to take, a couple of years to actually shut the place down. And so and I'm not going to go through every one of these meetings, but we met on multiple occasions with not only the reps and senators, but also DOC to keep checking in, where are we? And the message was clear each step of the way, still in the process of closing it down, and we have no plan for future use, and we have no plan for the plan. We, of course, took the opportunity every step of the way to say, voice at the table, proactive on the outcome, we want to be part of the solution, and we were assured every step of the way that we would. So we still believe that. So in June of 2023, a little bit ahead of schedule, because we had thought it was going to be a bit longer, but DOC came out and said they've moved the last of the prison population out of the prison. And so that was a multi-stage process. By June of 2023, they achieved that and had all the prisoners out, so it was no longer being used as a functioning prison. There was still a staff there because you have to maintain the place and keep it going and all that. And one of the things that we learned along the way is they stored a lot of records there, and those records need to be gone through because a lot of it is very, confidential stuff. And they had to go through all these records and sort out the records and figure what they needed to keep, and if they needed to keep it, where they're gonna put it, and so they had to move it and all that. To our knowledge, this process is still underway. Jim, is that what you understand?
I was actually up there today. They've changed their sign. It's called the MCI Central Transportation or something like that.
Okay.
I counted about 15 buses and
Yep.
11 to 15 regular individuals' cars. So there's people up there still.
So, and to our knowledge, it's still being operated by DOC, or has it been?
It's called MCI, so yeah, I would.
Yeah, so to our knowledge, and again, we want to confirm this in an upcoming meeting we'll have with our reps and senators, which by the way is next week. To our knowledge, this has not yet been turned over to the asset management and
No,
maintenance
Deb,
people.
I can confirm that.
Okay, good,
100%. It's
Okay.
being used as their central.
Okay,
It's where they park all their buses and the vans, so.
Okay. So they shut it down June of 2023, and we continued to meet and talk to them about, what the process was. We continued to get the same exact words that came back to us time after time. We gave them the same words time after time. In August of 2020, November of 2023, Glenn and I, as part of another group of town administration types and legislative delegation, Department of Corrections and so forth, toured the site. One of the things that I think this group is gonna want to do is tour the site. So one of the things that we'll talk about a little later on as we get into our next steps is when that might be a smart thing to go do. But I think it would be important for us to all see the place, get a good sense for how it's laid out, and what really it is involved when you look at, the structure of the building and so forth. Last August, the Senator Rush's office told us there are absolutely no plans for MCI Cedar Junction to house migrants. Oh, back up, I skipped a step. June of 2024, Bay State Correctional Facility had a migrant population moved in. You probably remember that down in Norfolk. That caused us to wonder, could that same thing happen at Cedar Junction? And so we asked for a meeting with the state people, the reps, the center, and the governor's office, and we were told in clear terms that there was no plan to do that, and that has turned out to be the case. But it was a kind of an interesting point for us, because if you talk to the folks in Norfolk, it caught them off guard when the state said, we're gonna house migrants there. What we didn't want to have happen is have something similar happen with us, and so we reiterated to them at that point that, being involved in the process is real important to us. On and on and on it goes. Senator Rush's office told us there are absolutely no plans for MCI Cedar Junction to house migrants, and there's currently no plans or timeline for repurposing the prison. MCI Cedar Junction is currently only housing documents and other DOC materials, with the possibility of also being used as a parking lot for DOC vehicles, which Jim just said, that were previously parked at the Bay State Correctional Center. So that brought us then into the fall, when we started talking as a select board about the need to own this process. We started to get to the point where we said, okay, we hear the same thing over and over and over again, that the state has no plan for a plan, blah, blah, blah. We said, we've got to own this. And in a meeting that we had with the state reps and senator, we said, we think we should be forming some kind of an advisory committee. They liked that idea. They said to us, if you could tell us two things. One, what kinds of things would be good for the town of Walpole to see land at that site? And number two, what things would you not want to see land at that site? If you could do those two things, that would be very helpful to us as your representatives as we talk to the governor's office and to our colleagues on the Hill. So that's really what got us down this path of saying, well, let's form this committee and start putting this whole process together. So that brings us to today. Here's our first meeting of that group, and let me just pause and see if there are any questions on anything I just said. There was quite a lot of stuff. Was that helpful? Oh, Jack, sorry, go ahead.
Kind of what you just said. Have they revealed, or do they got any data on what's in there?
In terms of,
The bad stuff.
Yeah.
Because I know they didn't want to put the illegals in there because they'd be sued because there's asbestos, there's lead, da-da-da-da-da-da. So my
So-
point is, we could do all this wonderful stuff and find out we got a massive problem like Conwell.
so let me just tell you, we are definitely cognizant of that. And one of the things that this group needs to take a position on, and I think we will, is that any kind of bad stuff, to use your word, that exists there. And there was a machining shop that was used, like all the license plates in the state came out of that place for many, many, many years. It is likely, to your point, that there are things in the ground there or in the building itself. I mean, it was built in 1954, so you think about things like asbestos and lead paint and stuff like that. So we have said all the way along that we want to make sure that that mitigation is something that's owned by the state of Massachusetts. And so as you think about this whole, if there's a right of first refusal thing, one of the things that we are going to really be leery of, or at least I'm going to be very leery of, is, we probably want to, you know, make sure that there are full studies done and all that before we get too deeply involved in anything on that site. My own sense, and, you know, I'm just offering this just because I want you to know where I'm coming from on it, but I don't think we want to own the thing. I think we want the state to continue to own it or sell it to somebody, and in that process, make sure that the ownership is responsible for the mitigation of the site. So yes, we need to also understand what's in the site, in the groundwater. It's a well system, and they, you know, are pumping water out of the ground. We need to know what's in that well water as well.
Now,
Yep.
I hope there's no burial grounds there, right? Has that been-
Not to my knowledge,
Okay.
not to my knowledge.
That's always one of the prisons you'll find, and everything just stops.
Fair question. Let me come back to the first thing. So Rick, as you're having a conversation with Weston and Sampson, one of the things that you might want to, or would you please ask them is, you know, we think about water quality, and I don't know what, they must have to do testing of those wells from time to time. So it would be interesting to know what that testing looks like and how we could get access to records that might talk to us about, you know, what's in that well water.
Yeah, being a registered public water supply,
Yeah,
it's all public information.
okay,
so
good.
It should be easily
On the
accessible.
EPA or something, on the EPA site?
DEP website, the Mass DEP.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I think like for other DCAM projects that I've seen them like go through the proposal process, when there's like a brownfield site or something that needs remediation, sometimes they'll agree to like up to a certain dollar value or something. But if there was ever like a environmental phase 1 study or something, that's also public information, even if it's old, you could still find it, and maybe, I can take that and try and.
If
see
you
I
could,
can find
that'd be
anything.
great, Brianna. The more intel we get about this site, the better off we're gonna be.
Yeah, if there was ever one done, it should be
Great.
findable.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Jack, what else?
No, that was it. I just hate to see us go through the whole process of
Yeah.
trying to think, there's like 100 million to clean up, it's just gonna sit there until we're all dead in 100 years.
I'm gonna tell you, that's an outcome that could happen.
Yeah.
I still think we need to own this process.
No, I
If
understand
that turns
that,
out
Jim.
to be the outcome, that's the
Yeah, I
outcome.
just don't want anybody out there thinking, we're gonna get this and we're gonna make a lot of money.
No, I don't think anyone's even,
No.
we're not suggesting that, so,
Whatever, on that thing,
yeah, okay.
TV.
What else? Anything else anyone would want to add on the discussion about the meetings that have taken place, the things we've heard from our reps, our senator, from the Department of Correction, the governor's office, anything that we need to talk about to get everyone up to speed on that? Glenn, anything you'd add?
No.
Jim, anything you would add?
Covered everything.
Okay, good. All right, so let's keep on going then. Next up, just by way of sharing, Rick has put together actually, you have these are from the assessor's office, you have these in your packet, and what they show you is all the things we know from an assessor's point of view. The assessed value of the property is $92 million. The land value is $1.4 million. It was built in 1954. You can see the square footage. The amount of land that's in Walpole, if I read it right, is 22 acres. Do I have that right? 22 acres. And Jim, you seem to think about there's another half in Norfolk?
It looks roughly that, yeah, we 50% on our side. They probably have they depend on the property size, but it's equivalent to us,
Okay.
yeah.
Jim, anything more to say about the assessments?
No, the only thing I would note is Jack did mention the power plant across the street, from what I recall from the fields. I think it's about 2 acres over there.
Okay.
But they own that, they kept that, they didn't give that over to the town.
Yeah, okay. Okay, good. Anybody else questions on what we got from the assessors? So you have that. Rick put together this little map of the water and sewer. Rick, do you want to just talk about that?
Yeah, sure.
quickly?
So there are actually no sewer and/or water utilities along Main Street. Everything at the LaRusso Athletic Complex, the utilities come off of Winter Street. Now, the only access to utilities for this particular MCI site would either be through those fields or down 1A or through one of the local neighborhoods in behind the power plant. So there's actually nothing directly in front of the site along 1A currently. In my opinion, it'd be very easy to access the utilities, very easy construction project, pretty straight shot, nothing out of the ordinary. It's just a matter of having the funds and/or, reason to do it.
Okay, good, thank you, Rick. While we're there, Jim Crowley, anything that you know about the site through, as our building commissioner, anything you know about the site that you'd want to offer up?
No, so the only thing we would have dealt with would be on the electrical side for any inspections over there, because on the building side, it's the state control that. Electrical wise, we control it because there's no state electrical inspectors. But building code wise, we've never been on site because it goes straight to the state building inspector. So on that side, I can just give you information on the electrical that they've had a standing permit with us since I've been here, where they just add on to it every year, whatever maintenance work they've done through the years.
Okay, good, thank you, Jim. Okay, so that, I think, brings us through all of the materials that I wanted to talk about from a level-setting point of view. So we've talked about the charge, we all know what we're here for. We've talked about all the discussions that have already taken place, and so everyone's up to speed on that. And we've talked a little bit about the site itself and what we know about it, whether that's from our assessors' information or the water and sewer and from the building commissioner. So that really is to bring us all up to current understanding and knowledge of the site. Obviously, there's a ton more stuff that we need to do to collectively be smart, but I wanted to make sure we were all caught up on that. So what I'd like to do now is shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about some additional next steps. Some of the things that we want to talk about is that site visit. So first of all, let me just ask the group here, do you agree that that would be a good thing to do for us to go and visit the site? I've been there. I can tell you, I think it would be, but I want to hear the rest of the group say that. Jack?
Yeah, you gotta go.
Yeah, okay.
It's
Yeah.
Gotta go.
You got it, yeah.
I agree.
I agree. So, Jim, as a follow-up here, I don't know, it'll probably take several weeks to get that organized, and we want to make sure that we have the right people there with us, which in my mind is the Department of Corrections people who actually know the site and run the site, who can talk to us about what's going on there, and of course, our reps and senator, and there may be others.
I'll submit a request. and
Okay.
It takes, the last time it took a month or two to organize, but yeah.
It's gonna take some time, and so but let's at least get it in the works, and frankly, the spring would probably be a better time to do it anyway, so that'll be all right. The other thing that I think we need to do is think about getting the reps and senators to come in here and talk to us. I want them to hear what's on your minds. I want them to give us an actual legislative update, so what do they know about the process? We're gonna see them on February 8th, and we're gonna give them a little bit of a rundown on what we talked about here today as we've gotten ourselves up and running. But I would also like to, in our next meeting, have them come in. Does that sound sensible to the group? So, Jim, we should get that organized as well. I'd also like to talk about public hearings. We want to have a lot of input from the public. I'm not quite sure what the right time to do that is, because I'm not sure we're collectively smart enough to have a productive public hearing at this point, although it wouldn't be a bad idea to have people tell us, gee, have you thought about this, have you thought about that? The more people that are thinking about this, the better, and I think the more we pull people into the process, the better. So I'd love to hear some discussion on, when is the right time to do some public input and public hearings. Thoughts?
I mean, later is a good start. Let's get some more information. Like I said, we're early, phase one
So
here.
when you say later,
Let's get some answers to some of our open questions. We were talking about right of first refusal. It seems like we have a lot more questions than answers. So let's at least get the legislative delegation in here, have that conversation. Let's see how that goes. And then, I think every meeting is posted, so we can have, people can come, and if we start to see people, not being able to fit in the room, then maybe we want to open it up for discussion. But yeah, I think we feel it out, so.
Okay.
It's hard to answer definitively.
so let me try to answer it. So let's say our next meeting is going to be follow-ups to this meeting, but not a public hearing. So that would mean with the legislative delegation and following up on the to-dos from this meeting. Then I think we've got the site visit, so that's probably our next meeting. Perhaps after that would be the time to do it, so in the March, April timeframe would probably be a good time to do that. Does that sound right?
My biggest concern with
Yeah.
that is having a public hearing. Take their input. They're
Yeah.
gonna be looking to you for answers. I don't know if you're gonna have those answers. And, you know, I think we should probably definitely urge or request the state reps and senator to come if you're gonna have it in March or April. But I just don't want you not to be prepared, because I
So
don't
do
know.
you
if
think, so do you
the
think,
rate the DOC goes, I think it's gonna take a long time. That's just how I feel. The state moves real slow, you know.
so do you think more like the summer?
Summer, possibly, yeah.
Okay.
I think like waiting until we do the site visit and then kind of assessing from there to see, because at least at that point, we'll
Yeah.
have like all seen the site and,
To Glenn's point, and I think you're right, we could always carry a floating thing like you do on the select board agenda, public input session. So at
Okay.
least we can look back and say, you know, in March you had a public input session. In February, you know, we had 3 people from the public there.
Okay.
We can advertise it more and then pick a date for the public hearing when we know we have something to report back, let them know where we stand with it.
Okay.
If you're okay with that.
I'm certainly good with that. I like the idea of putting the public input into the agenda as a standing item, because that way we can at least allow people who have a view to come in and give us their input, and that's gonna be helpful to us. So, Jack?
Well, I'll start with what Glenn said, we gotta know the rate of refusal. Plus, we should know from our state reps how this is going to go, because that's what people's gonna ask, and what the time frame is, because, you know, no one's gonna come down here and say it's gonna be 5 years, do you know what I mean? So you need some concrete answers on, people gonna know timing, how this all, so if we have those, then you can answer that. Once we understand what we can do and when it's gonna happen, then they can say what they think up there. But until that time, we can't go, we're not sure.
Okay, so we'll put it off to the summer to have a more formal kind of thing.
But get from the state
Yeah,
reps or however this is done in the past, so that you can give the people when it's gonna happen. And also, you know, if the refusal, well, we're not giving it anyway, we'd be sitting there like, we did all this for nothing,
right,
so.
okay. Okay, good, thank you. Other thoughts? Is there anything else we should talk about tonight? Things we haven't hit? Anything we should be thinking about for future meetings?
I just want to make a point that this is actually not in our charge, or perhaps it's not even relevant, but I just want to point out that there's also 94 acres of MWRA land right next to the prison site. We're talking about 22 acres here. The MWRA is completely separate entity. You know, Rick knows all about this, and so does Scott. It's not relevant to the conversation. However, it is vacant land that I don't know what it's used for. MWRA might need it for many years to come and might also combine it with this land. I'm not saying that's what's gonna happen, but I just wanna point out there's also 94 acres of undeveloped land next to the 22 acres that we're talking about.
So the sludge dump.
At one point in the 80s and the 90s, yes.
You never know, it could come back.
Right. Again, not part of this discussion, but I just wanted to point out that there is a vacant parcel that is sizable next to this. So,
Is there anything else we should be thinking about?
I think eventually you probably want to have town council and listen to options, but again, down the road.
Yeah.
As far as, you know, here's what you could consider for zoning, you know, here's the town's legal rights in this case, which I don't think we have very many, but right now, because they're still using it as an active site, it hasn't been declared, so eventually you may want to have council in.
the state owns the site, it's not like a ground lease, right, through the towns?
They own it.
They own it.
Yeah, they own it. And so this is why we want to be ahead of it, because we don't want to end up getting run over by some process that, you know, that is bigger than we are. So,
Jim, one other thing.
Sure.
If you want to, I think we should do it, is the abutters. We should have something that we send it to them, because they're the most affected.
yeah,
And they're gonna be calling down here, just because you're the abutters, you know, we don't know what's going on, so you can answer their questions so they know that they're involved. They may never come, but at least they know what's happening, and you don't get the calls down here, or they're all worried, that's all.
what form would that take, Jack?
Or just something that if someone calls down, or just send something out and mail it to all the abutters around the area.
Is that something that you think we should do in the near future or wait for a while?
You could do it after the next meeting or so, because it's gonna be on, and they're not,
Yeah.
and it, you know, all of a sudden, if you live next to it, and little Sally talks to you about it, you don't know what's going on, you're gonna get all antsy.
Yeah, I
At
agree.
least they're really part of the process too, if you think about it, so they could here you go. This is what we discussed, or this is just your info for you, and anybody else who wants it.
Which goes to my earlier point of, we want to be fully transparent on this and have people involved early, which is why I keep pointing to the public input. I recognize we have to be ready for the public input, I think that's good feedback, but I do want to make sure that we're being very transparent on this process, okay?
Well, it affects their property values, they're
Sure.
gonna sell and this and that, so at least they know something's happening, and it's probably gonna go in a good way, so just that they're not in a room with no windows,
I agree.
so to speak.
Okay, so, let me try and wrap us up here. So we'll set up, a meeting with the legislative delegation sometime in the not-too-distant future. We'll meet with them on the 8th. We'll talk about that. We'll get that on the calendar. That'll be probably our next meeting. We will also set up a meeting to go and tour the facility itself. So that'll be probably meeting number 3. And then, we'll see where we go from there. But, I think this was a good level-setting meeting. I'm glad we were able to get the group together. I'm glad we were able to have the dialogue that we had, and I feel as though, you know, we've got ourselves, you know, off to a good start. Obviously, a ton more work to be done here. Any closing comments, Glenn?
No.
Jim? No. Anyone else? Closing
Nice
comments?
to be
Jack?
ahead of it.
Yeah, try to. All right, good. Could I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I'll second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. We're now adjourned. Thank you.